Hello, my friends. If you enjoy this video, don't forget to like and subscribe.
I never thought I'd be the kind of person who notices every little sound, who jumps at the whisper of a branch against the window or a shadow shifting just outside the porch light. But here I am, and I can't stop hearing it. It started the night I decided to stay home alone. My roommate had gone out of town for the weekend, and I thought it would be nice, peaceful even, to have the apartment to myself. I never imagined that peace could turn into a kind of terror that burrows into your chest. It was just past midnight when I first heard it. I was sitting on the couch, scrolling through my phone, half listening to a documentary about unsolved crimes when a faint knock rattled the door. Not the door to the hallway, the actual front door. I froze. I wasn't expecting anyone, and the apartment building was quiet. The only other tenants were either out of town or asleep. I told myself it was probably someone in a neighboring door, or maybe a loose pipe vibrating. I tried to convince myself, but the sound had a rhythm to it that didn't feel random. Knock, pause, knock, knock. I stood and moved closer to the peephole, heart hammering, only to see the empty hallway. Just the dimly lit corridor, the carpet frayed, the walls marked with years of tenant mistakes and chipped paint. Nobody was there. I laughed nervously, shaking my head. "You're being ridiculous," I whispered, and for a moment it was quiet again. I tried to settle back onto the couch, but the feeling didn't leave. It was like the silence had weight. I kept glancing at the door, telling myself I would just ignore it. Maybe it was someone playing a prank. My phone buzzed, a text from my roommate. "Have fun being alone this weekend." I smiled, even though the room felt colder than usual. Then the knocking started again, louder this time. I froze, gripping my phone like a lifeline. It wasn't like before. It wasn't the light, intermittent taps. It was heavy, deliberate. I crept toward the door, peeking through the peephole again. Empty hallway. Nothing. I unlocked the door, just enough to crack it open, a small gap between me and the world outside. My neighbor's door across the hall was still closed. The hallway was empty. My imagination was running wild. I know that now. But at the time, I felt something crawling along my spine, that tiny, almost imperceptible chill that told you something isn't right. I slammed the door shut and locked it, triple-checked the chain, and tried to laugh. It's nothing. Just nothing. I poured myself a glass of water and tried to distract myself with the documentary again. But then I heard it, a soft, dragging sound from the other side of the door. It was like someone or something was moving across the hallway floor just beyond my sight. Slow, careful, calculated. My phone buzzed again. Another text from my roommate. "Remember, don't forget to lock up. You never know." I rolled my eyes, muttering, yeah. I felt stupid, silly, but the sound didn't stop. In fact, it grew. The dragging turned into scraping, like nails or something rough being pulled along the metal door frame. I couldn't think. I just couldn't. I ran to the bedroom, grabbing the knife from the drawer, a pathetic comfort, and my phone. I dialed 911, whispering to the operator that someone was outside my door, but then silence. The scraping had stopped. I strained my ears, listening. Nothing. My pulse was a drum in my ears. And then I heard it, breathing. Soft, shallow, almost imperceptible, from right outside my door. I panicked. I called out, "Who's there?" My voice sounded tiny in the apartment, fragile. Nothing. I tried to open the door to run, but the chain lock was too tight. I yanked at it, fumbling, and the breathing stopped, just as suddenly as it had started. I backed away from the door, pressing myself against the wall, eyes fixed on that unassuming wooden slab that had never looked more sinister. My mind raced. My hand shook. and then a knock, so loud it shook the door frame. Knock, knock, knock. I jumped back, knife raised. I'm calling the cops. I shouted. Silence. Then from the other side, a slow, deliberate whisper. Not words, just a sound. H, like air being pulled through teeth. I bolted to the bedroom window, tried to convince myself to just jump down to the fire escape and get out. But the city was quiet, streets empty. The kind of quiet that makes you feel exposed, like everyone is hiding, watching, waiting. And I just knew that whoever was outside wasn't planning to wait politely for me to leave. Hours passed, or maybe minutes. Time lost all meaning. Every sound made me jump. Every shadow felt like a person looming. I called my friend, anyone, just to hear a human voice. But my phone showed no signal. And the knocking, it never stopped. Always just at the edge of my hearing, sometimes soft, sometimes hard, always there. By dawn, I couldn't take it anymore. I needed to know. I needed to see. I crept to the door, slowly lifting the chain, preparing myself for the worst. When I opened it, nothing. No footprints, no signs of anyone. Just the faint traces of something heavy having dragged across the floor outside my door. And then I saw it. Written in the condensation on the inside of the door's peephole, I know you're awake. I screamed and slammed the door shut, locking it again. I didn't sleep that night or the next. Every time I tried, I heard that breathing, that soft scraping, the whisper in the dark. I called my roommate, begged her to come home. She laughed it off, said I was imagining things. I told myself the same thing at first. But then it happened again the following week. Same time, same pattern. I was never physically hurt, but I was terrified every single second. And always the same message, I know you're awake. I moved out shortly after. New apartment, different neighborhood, but the feeling never left. Even now, years later, I notice when doors creak, when shadows move in ways they shouldn't. I hear whispers sometimes in the quietest parts of the night. And last week, I saw someone standing outside my new apartment across the street, watching. I froze, heart hammering, and I noticed something that made me sick to my stomach. They weren't looking at the street or the buildings. They were looking at me. I ran inside, locked the door, and I haven't looked out since. But I know the truth. They're always outside, always, watching, waiting. And maybe that's the worst part, not knowing when they'll finally come in, not knowing why they're there. Just knowing, with a certainty that gnaws at your soul, that the world outside your door is not safe. Not ever. I keep my lights on all night now, even though I know it doesn't matter. I keep the doors locked, every possible lock in place. I try to sleep with my phone in my hand. But sometimes in the middle of the night, I hear it, the soft, slow knock. And I know they're outside. Waiting. I never used to be afraid of the dark. Not really. Growing up, my parents joked that I had night vision, that I'd wander the house at night without a single worry. But all that changed one Friday in November, and it started the way most things do, innocent enough. I was home alone. My roommate had gone out for a weekend trip to visit her family, and I had the apartment to myself. I planned on a quiet night, maybe some takeout and a movie. The sun had just dipped below the horizon, leaving the city streets glowing with the yellow-orange glare of streetlights. I locked the door behind me, went straight to the couch, and tried to relax. It was quiet at first. Too quiet, maybe. I didn't think anything of it until I saw movement outside the living room window. At first, I thought it was a neighbor walking their dog or someone passing in the streetlight's glare. But when I squinted, I realized there was no one there. Just the shadow of a figure, tall, still, standing near the alley behind the apartment building. I froze. I should have looked away, ignored it, but I couldn't. Something about it felt wrong. I grabbed my phone and texted my roommate. Hey, just saw someone outside. Weird. No response, of course. I tried to convince myself it was nothing. Maybe a trick of the light, a code on a garbage can, my imagination running wild. I pulled the blinds down, turned on the TV, anything to distract myself. But that figure never went away. It just stood there, watching. Hours passed, and the shadow remained. Every time I looked, it hadn't moved an inch. My heart began to race. I told myself I was being paranoid, that there was no reason anyone would target me. I live in a decent neighborhood, not some crime-ridden block. Still, something in me told me to be cautious. I checked the locks again 1, 2, 3 times, then sat back down, trying to calm myself. I told myself to stay rational. Maybe it was a homeless person seeking warmth, maybe a neighbor. But when I glanced out the window again, I realized it wasn't just standing there. Its head turned slowly, as if it knew I was watching. I couldn't take it anymore. I needed to call someone, but my phone showed zero signal. I paced the apartment, trying to think of what to do. Should I leave? Go to a hotel? But leaving meant passing the window. Passing that figure. By midnight, I was a mess of nerves. Every shadow seemed to stretch toward me. Every wind gust sounded like a whisper. I pulled the curtains tight, sat in the corner of the living room, knife in hand. Not that I expected it to help, but I couldn't leave it down. And then it happened. A knock. Not at the door, not at a window. The walls themselves seemed to reverberate with it. Knock. Slow. Deliberate. Knock. I froze. My breath caught in my throat. I didn't respond. Another knock. And then a whisper. Not a word, just the sound of air brushing against something, like a mouth barely open. I tried to convince myself it was nothing, but the rational thoughts wouldn't come. The knocking stopped. The whispering stopped. Silence returned, heavier than before. I thought I was safe, that maybe it had gone. But then, from outside the apartment door, came another sound, a scratching, something sharp dragging across the wood. I bolted to the door, gripping the knob. My hand shook so violently I could barely turn it. Whoever, or whatever, was out there trying to get in. I backed away, heart hammering, then realized I wasn't hearing footsteps retreating. I wasn't hearing anything except that soft, insistent scratch, slowly moving down the door like it was circling me, learning me. And then I heard it, my name, whispered, low. I swear to God, it was my name. I ran to the bedroom, locked the door, shoved the dresser against it. I grabbed my laptop, my phone, anything to call for help. No signal, no Wi-Fi. It was like the apartment itself had gone offline. I tried every number, every app, nothing. I was alone, completely alone. Hours passed. The scratching never stopped. It moved around the apartment, sometimes behind me, sometimes at the door, always just out of sight. I was too scared to leave the bedroom. I couldn't sleep, couldn't eat, couldn't think straight. And then, in the early morning, when the sky began to gray with the first hints of dawn, I heard something else. A voice, clear this time, speaking right outside the bedroom door. I know what you did. I froze. My mind went blank. I hadn't done anything. Nothing illegal, nothing immoral. I live a normal life. What could it mean? The knocking, the scratching, the whispering all stopped. Silence. For the first time all night, absolute quiet. I didn't dare breathe. I waited for hours. The morning sunlight finally began to spill into the bedroom. Hesitant, I inched toward the door. Nothing. No sound. No figure. Just a faint outline of scratches along the wood. I opened the door. The hallway was empty. No one. No footprints. No sign of anything except a single note, taped neatly to the floor where my door had been scratched. It read, "You can't hide forever." I took the note and ran. I left everything behind. Apartment, belongings, even my car. I drove hundreds of miles away, rented a room in a motel, stayed with friends, anywhere far enough to feel safe. For a while, I thought I was free. But late at night, when I close my eyes, I can still see the shadow, still hear the whisper. And last week, as I was walking home from the grocery store, I saw it again. Across the street, standing perfectly still, watching me. I ran into my apartment, locked the door, and looked out the window. But there it was, just standing there, and then something impossible happened. It waved. A wave, and a voice from nowhere and everywhere said, "I'll be outside forever." I haven't slept properly since. I don't open the door for anyone. I don't answer calls I don't recognize. I don't look outside when I hear movement. Because I know the truth now. The someone outside doesn't leave. Not really. They just wait, and they learn, and they come back. I sometimes think about moving again, but no matter where I go, I know I can never escape them. And one night, when I'm not looking, when I let my guard down, they'll be there. Outside, watching, waiting. And I won't even hear them knock. I had never spent a night alone in that house before. It was my uncle's old place, a 2-story Victorian with peeling paint and shutters that never quite stayed closed. I had agreed to house sit while he went to Florida for a week. He assured me it would be quiet, peaceful. I had expected that too. The first evening passed uneventfully. I unpacked my things, made a small dinner, and tried to settle in with a book. By 10, I had turned off most of the lights, leaving only a lamp in the living room. That's when I first noticed the shadow. At first, I thought it was a trick of the curtains in the wind, but then it moved, or rather, it stayed in place perfectly still, and I realized it wasn't a shadow at all. It was a person standing at the edge of the driveway, outside the front window. I couldn't make out details in the dim streetlight, just a tall shape. I told myself it must be someone passing by, maybe looking for a neighbor, but it didn't move. I went to the window and looked closer. They hadn't moved an inch. I knocked on the glass lightly. No reaction. I tapped harder. Still nothing. My stomach tightened. I reached for my phone, intending to call the police, but realized it had no signal. The house was old. Reception was always spotty. I cursed myself for not checking earlier. I decided to leave it alone. Surely, whoever it was would leave eventually. I tried to focus on my book, but I couldn't. Every time I glanced toward the window, the figure was still there. Hours passed, and I kept seeing them standing exactly the same, never turning, never moving. By midnight, I couldn't take it anymore. I pulled on a jacket and grabbed the flashlight from the hall closet. I stepped outside, trying to convince myself I was being paranoid. The air was cold and damp, smelling faintly of autumn leaves and wet asphalt. I called out, "Hey, can I help you?" No response. I approached cautiously. Whoever, or whatever, it was, they didn't flinch. I got closer, and that's when I realized something impossible. The figure had no face. The streetlight hit it just enough to see smooth, blank skin where eyes, nose, and mouth should have been. I stumbled backward, tripping over the curb, heart hammering. The figure didn't move, didn't react. Then, almost imperceptibly, it lifted its hand and pointed at me. I ran inside, slamming the door behind me and locking it. My breaths came in sharp bursts. I checked every lock, every window. I tried to tell myself it was some kind of prank or hallucination, but deep down, I knew it wasn't. The rest of the night was unbearable. I stayed in the living room, lights on, clutching a baseball bat I'd found in the closet. I couldn't sleep. Every creak of the floor, every whisper of wind against the walls set my heart racing. By morning, I thought it might have been a dream, some trick my exhausted mind had played. But when I opened the blinds, the figure was back, standing across the street. It hadn't moved. It didn't blink. It didn't breathe, at least not visibly. It simply stood there, watching. I decided to call my uncle. The number went straight to voicemail. Then I tried a neighbor I knew. No answer. I realized with a sinking feeling that I was completely cut off. Days passed. Each night, the figure returned. Sometimes it was across the street, sometimes at the end of the driveway. It never moved closer, but the unease it caused was unbearable. I couldn't leave the house. I couldn't stay calm. One evening, after a particularly long day of trying to ignore it, I noticed something new. There were small marks on the front door, tiny scratches, almost like fingernails dragging across the paint. I hadn't seen them before. My hand shook as I touched them. That night, I decided I couldn't take it anymore. I packed a bag and intended to leave, despite the dark. I grabbed my keys, my phone, and the bat. As I opened the door, the figure was closer than usual, on the porch just outside the threshold. I froze. It raised its faceless head toward me, tilting it in a way that seemed unnaturally deliberate. Then it moved, not walking, not running, just gliding forward impossibly fast straight through the gate. I stumbled back, slammed the door, and locked it. I spent hours thinking, planning, trying to figure out what to do. Police wouldn't believe me. Friends would think I was losing it. And the figure, it didn't seem interested in hurting me. Not exactly. It was studying me, learning me, as though it existed to observe, to understand. On the fourth night, I made a choice. I wouldn't try to escape. I would confront it. Maybe that was stupid. Maybe I was finally ready to lose my mind. But I needed to know. I opened the door just enough to slip outside, flashlight in hand. The figure stood there, waiting. I tried to speak, my voice cracking. "What do you want?" It tilted its head. I swear I could feel it listening. Then, without a sound, it reached into its own chest and pulled something out. A small, smooth object the color of pale clay. It held it out to me. I didn't move. I don't know why I did it. Some instinct, some foolish curiosity. I reached out and took the object. Instantly, I felt everything. Not memories, not thoughts exactly, but emotions, fear, longing, regret, anger, all swirling inside me. The world shifted. I was no longer standing in the driveway. I was everywhere and nowhere, seeing every street, every alley, every shadowed corner where the faceless ones waited, observing, always observing. I dropped the object. The figure vanished. My knees hit the asphalt. I tried to scream, but no sound came out. The city felt different, heavy, watching, alive. When I finally managed to get back inside, I realized something terrifying. The faceless figure hadn't left. I had become it. Not completely, not yet, but part of me had changed. I could feel the watching, the waiting, the patient attention that never sleeps. I moved out the next day. I don't go back to that street. I don't answer calls I don't recognize. I stay in well-lit places, and I never look out the window after dark. But sometimes when I close my eyes, I see them. Other figures, faceless, patient, waiting, and I feel them in me. The worst part is knowing this. The someone outside isn't just outside. They're in everyone who looks too closely, who notices the shadows. And now, I am one of them, whether I want to be or not. I'm always watching, always outside. Even when I'm inside. I thought moving into a quiet suburban neighborhood would be the start of a peaceful life. I'd left a chaotic city apartment behind, the kind where sirens were as common as people, and replaced it with a small house on a tree-lined street where the neighbors waved, lawns were perfectly mowed, and the night seemed calm. It was my first night alone in the house. My partner had gone out of town for the weekend, and I was looking forward to it. Movies, snacks, maybe a long soak in the tub. The kind of night where nothing could go wrong. But something did. It started just after 11. I had finished dinner and was sprawled on the couch when I saw it. Movement across the living room window. A shadow, tall and thin, pacing just beyond the streetlight's glow. I froze. Whoever it was didn't belong. The street was empty. I pulled the blinds aside, heart pounding, and that's when I realized it wasn't pacing. It wasn't moving at all. It was standing there, watching. I texted my partner, "Hey, there's someone outside my house." Creepy. No response. I try not to panic. Maybe it was a neighbor taking a walk. Maybe someone lost. I peeked through the curtains again, and it was still there. Not moving. Not blinking. Not breathing, at least not visibly. I locked the doors and checked the windows. Everyone secured. My phone showed full signal, so I called a friend, explained what I was seeing. They laughed it off. Probably just someone looking for a house number or a cat. They said, "I want to believe that, but I didn't." Something felt wrong. Hours passed. I tried to distract myself with a movie, but I kept glancing toward the window. Each time I looked, the figure remained, standing at the edge of the street, impossibly still, as if carved from shadow. At 2 a.m., I noticed movement in the corner of my eye. Not from the street, from inside the house. I froze. The air seemed heavier, denser, like it had been waiting for me to notice. The hairs on my arms stood straight. My front door, double-locked, rattled as if someone or something was pressing against it from the outside. I grabbed a kitchen knife. I didn't know why. I wasn't sure it would help. I thought about calling 911, but before I could, the door stopped rattling. Silence fell. Complete, suffocating silence. I was tense, every muscle coiled, afraid to breathe. Then I heard it. From the living room window, a slow, deliberate knock. I didn't respond. My heart pounded in my ears. Another knock, louder this time. Then a third, each one slower than the last, perfectly measured. I tried to tell myself it was a branch or the wind, but I knew. Someone or something was outside. It was waiting, patient. Hours blurred. I didn't sleep. I stayed in the bedroom with all the lights on, listening, waiting, watching shadows. Daylight finally came, but when I looked outside, the figure was gone. Relief washed over me. Maybe it had been a prank. Maybe I had imagined it. I tried to resume normal life. I went to work, avoided looking out the windows, told myself it was over. But that night it returned. Closer this time, at the edge of the driveway. Always watching, always silent, always patient. One night, after it had been several weeks of this, I decided to confront it. I had to know why it was here, what it wanted. I stepped outside, flashlight in hand, prepared to yell, to defend myself, to do anything to end this nightmare. It didn't move, but I noticed something strange. Its hands were clasped in front of it, and it held a small object, a notebook, leather-bound, worn. Without thinking, I stepped closer. My foot touched the gravel, and the figure lifted its head, faceless and smooth, and tilted it slightly. Then it extended the notebook toward me. I hesitated, my mind screaming at me to run, but curiosity or madness won. I reached out and took the notebook. The moment I touched it, the world shifted. My thoughts were no longer my own. Memories that weren't mine flooded my mind. Streets I'd never walked, houses I'd never seen, people I'd never met. And with them, a chilling understanding. The notebook recorded lives. The faceless figure wasn't just outside my house. It was outside every house in every street, watching, learning, waiting. I dropped the notebook and stumbled back. The figure didn't move, didn't speak, didn't blink. Then, impossibly, it dissolved into shadow, spreading across the yard like ink in water, seeping toward the houses on the street, toward the neighborhood, as if it were part of the night itself. I ran inside and locked the door. I didn't sleep. I didn't eat. I didn't call anyone. I watched the shadows, waiting for it to return, knowing it always would. Weeks later, I discovered something worse. A small scratch on the inside of my window, tiny, almost imperceptible, but it was there. Another appeared each night, forming letters over time. I stared at the window one evening, and the letters spelled my name. Then a question: do you see now? I realized the truth. The figure wasn't outside to threaten me. It was teaching me. It had always been here, but not as a visitor. It was inside me too, in the corners of my mind. And now, after weeks of watching, it had chosen me to understand, to see. I tried to fight it. I threw myself into work, friends, errands, anything to distract myself. But the feeling persisted. The patience, the waiting, the watching. It became unbearable. Then, one night, I stepped outside to confront it again. I was tired of the waiting, the fear. And this time, it spoke, not with words, not with sound, but directly in my mind. You're the outside now. The world shifted, and I understood. Not as metaphor, not as hallucination. I became the watcher, the patient observer. I was no longer alone. Not really. And as I look back now, writing this down in a house I barely recognize as mine, I know the figure hasn't left. I become it. I wait. I watch. And I know that the next time someone is alone, someone notices a shadow at their window, it will be me, or someone like me. The horror isn't outside. The horror is in the waiting. Always. And someday, I'll be outside your window too. I had just moved into my first house. A small, single-story place on the edge of town, quiet and ordinary. The kind of neighborhood where everyone mows their lawn at 6 on a Saturday morning and waves politely to strangers. I had been excited for weeks. Finally, a place of my own. The first night, I stayed up later than usual, unpacking, arranging furniture, trying to make the place feel lived in. By 11, the house was quiet. Just me, the faint hum of the refrigerator, and the street outside. I thought I was alone. I was wrong. At first, I noticed it through the corner of my eye, a shadow across the living room window. At first, I tried to dismiss it, telling myself it was the reflection of my lamp, a trick of the dim streetlight. But when I glanced properly, I saw a figure. A man, tall, thin, standing just beyond the glow of the street lamp. I froze. He didn't move. He didn't even blink. Just stood there, staring at the house. I stepped back from the window. Maybe he was a neighbor, maybe someone lost. I tried to ignore it, but something didn't feel right. My gut twisted into a tight knot. I locked the doors, checked the windows, and tried to convince myself it was nothing. By midnight, I couldn't take it anymore. I peeked outside the blinds again. The figure was closer, just at the edge of the driveway now. My heart was racing. I grabbed my phone to call the police, but there was no signal. Of course there wasn't. I considered leaving, driving to a hotel, anywhere far from that stair. But every time I thought about opening the door, a wave of dread pinned me in place. I stayed on the couch, pretending to watch TV, though I couldn't focus on anything. The nights that followed were the same. The figure returned each night, always at the same spot, never moving closer, never retreating, always watching. I began to notice other things, small things, shadows that shifted against the walls. The feeling of being touched by a breeze in places where no windows were open. I felt like I was being studied, and the thought made my skin crawl. On the third night, I heard a knock at the front door. I froze. There was nobody there when I looked through the peephole, just the empty porch. But the knock had come from somewhere real, tangible. I tried to dismiss it, but the sense of wrongness stayed. I stopped sleeping. I stopped eating. I barely left the living room. Every creak of the floor made me jump. Every passing car felt like it might hide someone watching me. I began to wonder if I was losing my mind. Then something changed. It wasn't at the driveway anymore. It was closer, at the edge of my yard. I saw it clearly for the first time. Its face was empty, smooth, featureless, pale, not human. Its body moved in perfect silence, like it wasn't constrained by ordinary physics. It raised one arm and pointed at me. I ran inside, locked the door, and stayed there for hours, shaking, unable to breathe properly. The next morning, I considered leaving. I packed a bag and tried to drive to a motel. I didn't get far. As I started the car, I noticed something written across the passenger side window. Not painted, not etched, just there. Words that hadn't been there before. Don't leave. I slammed the door and ran back inside. The figure was on the porch now, staring at me. I realized something terrible. It wasn't outside in a physical sense. It was attached to the house, to me. Wherever I went, it would follow. I tried reasoning with it. "Why are you here?" I shouted. "What do you want?" It tilted its head. No answer. Not even a blink. Just silence and that impossible patience. Over the next week, I noticed more signs. My bedroom window covered in faint scratches, marks on the inside of the door, even the lights flickering when it was near. I tried to leave again and again, but something always stopped me. My car wouldn't start. My phone would die instantly. Roads I knew led to nowhere. I realized then that this wasn't random. This wasn't a prank. This was deliberate. One night, in a surge of desperation, I opened the front door, stepped outside, and confronted it. "I don't know what you want from me," I said. "I'll do anything, just stop this." The figure didn't move, but then, impossibly, it reached into its own chest and pulled something out. A small, smooth stone, pale, cold, almost alive in my hand. I felt a strange pull, as if the stone was tugging at something inside me. I dropped it. The figure didn't react. Then, slowly, it lifted one hand toward the sky and dissolved. Not into nothing, but into shadows that spread over the street, the neighborhood, the town. A creeping darkness that seemed to whisper, patient and endless. I thought it was over. I didn't know what had happened, but I thought I was safe. The next morning, I awoke to find a note on my kitchen table. Handwriting I didn't recognize. It read, "You invited them in." I tried to leave again. The town felt different now. Familiar streets twisted into impossible angles. Houses I knew were gone, replaced by others I didn't recognize. It was as if the world had shifted. And then I realized the truth. It had never been outside. Not really. It had been waiting for me to notice it, to acknowledge it, to give it a place in my life. And by acknowledging it, by even seeing it, I had let it in. I don't know how much time has passed. I lost track of days. Nights and mornings blur. The figure, or what it has become, never leaves. Sometimes I think I can see other shapes moving in the corner of my eyes, shadows that weren't there before. Always waiting, patient, watching. I tried to escape, tried to call help, tried to fight it. But every time I attempt to leave, I find myself back inside the house, on this street, with the same quiet suburban neighborhood and the same shadows. I realize now that it doesn't matter how far I go. Once you invite it in, it follows you everywhere. And the strangest part? I've started noticing people outside, strangers in the street, standing still and watching my windows. I see their faces featureless, blank, and I understand. They are me. I am them. And now I wait, patiently, watching, because that is what it does. That is what I do. And one day, someone else will notice, someone else will invite it in, and the cycle will continue. There is no outside. There is only the watching. I had never been alone in a house before. Not really. College dorms, apartments shared with roommates, even a tiny studio. I always had someone within shouting distance. But when my parents left for a weekend trip, leaving me with their old house on the outskirts of town, I found myself alone for the first time in my life. The house was quiet, too quiet, the kind of quiet that made every creak of the floorboard sound like an explosion. I unpacked my things slowly, set up my laptop in the living room, and tried to convince myself it was normal. By 9, I was watching a movie, the kind of dumb comedy I didn't even like, just to hear some sound beyond the hum of the heating system. That's when I noticed it. Through the living room window, a shadow moved in the yard. I froze. It wasn't a stray dog or a stray cat. This was tall, upright, human-shaped. I squinted, trying to see more clearly. There was no face, or at least I couldn't make one out. Just the outline of someone or something standing near the edge of the yard. I called out, "Hello." Nothing. I told myself to breathe. Maybe it was a neighbor. Maybe it was someone walking by. Maybe it wasn't even there. But my gut told me otherwise. I locked the doors, checked every window, tried to focus on the movie, and then I saw it again, closer this time, right near the front porch. I swear I could feel it watching me, even through the glass. My hand shook. I called my best friend. No answer. I called my parents' cell phones. No signal. My fingers hovered over the keypad like I was waiting for permission to run, but I didn't know where to go. I was trapped inside a house that suddenly felt wrong. By midnight, I couldn't stay still any longer. I grabbed a flashlight and the baseball bat from the closet and went to the door. I cracked it open slowly. No one. I stepped outside. The yard was empty. The street was empty. Just the usual suburban quiet. I told myself it was nothing. A trick of the shadows. An overactive imagination. But as I turned to go back inside, I noticed footprints. Small, wet footprints across the porch, leading to the door. They didn't look human. Too narrow, too long, too deliberate. I bolted inside and locked the door again. For hours, I sat in the corner, every muscle tensed, listening. That's when I heard the scratching. At first, I thought it was the walls settling. Then I realized it was coming from the front door. Slow, deliberate scratches, moving down the wood. I don't remember when I stopped being able to tell if it was day or night. The scratching never stopped. Sometimes it slowed, sometimes it sped up. Sometimes I thought I heard breathing. A week passed like that. I barely ate. I barely slept. I considered leaving, but my car wouldn't start. My phone would die instantly. Roads I knew seemed to twist back to the house. I couldn't escape. And then one night it changed. I woke to a knock on the window. The figure had returned, standing silently outside the living room glass. I froze. This time, it wasn't distant. Its face, I could see it now. Not human. Smooth, pale, almost like wax. No eyes, no mouth, just nothing. And it raised a hand, slowly, pointing at me. I didn't move. I didn't breathe. Then it did something impossible. It lifted its arm, held something in its hand. A small black book. It was old, worn, like leather that had been left in the rain too long. It placed it carefully on the porch steps and stepped back. I wanted to leave it. I wanted to run. But something about the book pulled me forward. I grabbed it. The moment my fingers touched the leather, I saw everything. Not with my eyes, but with my mind. I saw other houses, other people, other shadows like the one outside my window. Watching, waiting, recording. They weren't here to harm. They were here to observe, to learn, to record. And now so was I. I dropped the book. The figure dissolved into the night. But I couldn't move. I couldn't think. I realized with a sinking feeling that I had changed. The watching, the waiting, the silence. It wasn't just outside anymore. It was inside me. Days passed. I tried to leave, tried to tell someone, but everything I attempted led me back to that house, to that street. And each night, I noticed more shadows. Figures across the street, at the edge of lawns, standing perfectly still. Featureless, patient, watching. Then I understood. The figure wasn't outside to scare me. It was outside to recruit me. And I had accepted. I don't know how long I've been here now. I have tried to escape. I have tried to hide. But the house is only the beginning. The waiting, the observing has become part of me. I see shapes in the corner of my vision. I feel the patient gaze of someone or something watching me even when I close my eyes. I know what I have to do. Tonight, I step outside. Not to run, not to fight, not to scream. I step outside to wait, to watch, to learn, and eventually to call someone else's attention to the shadows that have always been there. Because the truth is simple, terrifying, and endless. The someone outside is always waiting. And now I am too. I thought moving into a quiet suburban street would give me peace. After 5 years of cramped apartments, sirens, and noisy neighbors, I finally had a small house all to myself. The street was lined with maple trees, their leaves turning gold and red. Everything seemed normal, calm. I didn't realize how wrong normal could be. It started on my first night alone. My partner was out of town for a weekend, and I had planned to relax, movies, takeout, maybe a long soak in the tub. I had barely settled on the couch when I noticed something in the corner of my eye, a figure outside the front window. At first, I thought it was a neighbor, maybe someone walking home. But as I focused, I realized it was standing completely still just beyond the glow of the streetlight. Its outline was unmistakably human, but there was something off. It wasn't moving, not blinking, not breathing, at least not in a way I could see. I felt my stomach knot. I backed away from the window. Maybe it was a hallucination. Maybe I was tired, but the figure didn't vanish. It stayed there all night, and every time I glanced out the window, it was still in the same spot. By the second night, it had moved closer, right to the edge of the yard. I locked the doors and windows, triple-checked them, and tried to ignore it. I called a friend, explained what I was seeing, but they laughed it off. Probably just someone looking for a house number, they said. I wanted to believe that, but the unease in my chest told me otherwise. The third night it knocked. Not at the door, not on the walls, but on the window. I froze. I didn't dare look. Then just as suddenly it stopped. I tried to sleep, but every creak of the floor, every whisper of whine through the trees made my heart race. Days passed, each night worse than the last. The figure never moved closer physically, but I could feel its attention like a weight pressing through the glass. I stopped eating properly. I barely slept. I considered leaving the house entirely, but every attempt ended with something stopping me. A car that wouldn't start, a phone that had no signal, roads that looped back to the street. On the fifth night, I noticed something new. Scratches on the front door. Thin, deliberate, running horizontally across the wood. I hadn't seen them before. My hand shook as I traced them. Whoever, or whatever, was outside had been closer than I realized. I tried to fight it. I screamed at the window, shouted at the empty yard, demanded it leave. The figure did nothing, just watched, patient, immovable. And then it did something impossible. It raised its arm, held out a small, black notebook. I didn't know how it got there. It hadn't moved, but there it was, resting against the porch steps. I hesitated. Fear screamed at me to leave it alone. Curiosity made my fingers twitch. Slowly, I picked it up. The moment my hand touched the leather, the world shifted. Memories that weren't mine flooded my mind. Streets I'd never walked. Houses I'd never seen. People I'd never met. And all the while, I realized I wasn't just seeing them, I was them. Feeling their fear, their hesitation, their awareness of the watching figure. I dropped the notebook. The figure dissolved into the night, but I felt it everywhere. It had entered me. The watching, the waiting, it wasn't just outside anymore. It was inside, patient, learning, observing. I tried to leave the house the next day. My car refused to start. My phone went dead the moment I tried to call anyone. Even familiar roads seemed unfamiliar, twisting back toward my street. The figure had expanded its influence beyond the yard, beyond the house. It had seeped into the world. Weeks passed. Shadows appeared in the corners of my eyes. Figures outside neighbors' windows. Featureless faces watching from parked cars. And I realized something horrifying. The figure wasn't alone. It had multiplied. The notebook had been a test, a way to bring me into it, and I had failed. One night, desperate, I opened the front door to confront it. I shouted, "What do you want?" The wind carried my words away. The street was empty. But then I saw the notebook again, lying on the steps, open to a page I had never seen before. Words appeared as if written by an invisible hand. "You are next." I felt a cold realization wash over me. This wasn't about being scared. It wasn't about leaving. It was about becoming. The figure outside wasn't a threat, it was a guide. And I had been chosen. Now I wait. I watch. Shadows in windows, corners of streets, faces in passing cars. I see them. I understand them. And sometimes, late at night, I see someone like me, standing at the edge of a yard, featureless, patient, waiting. I don't run anymore. I don't fight. I step outside when the night is quiet, and I watch because I know that someday someone else will notice, someone else will invite it in, and the cycle will continue. The figure isn't outside. It's everywhere. And now so am I. I never thought much about living alone until the night it all went wrong. I had moved into a small house on the outskirts of town, a quiet street lined with maples that shook gently in the wind. My roommate had moved out months earlier, and for the first time in years, I had the place entirely to myself. It started innocently enough. I was making dinner, humming along to a podcast, when I glanced out the window and saw movement. At first, I assumed it was a neighbor walking their dog, but the street was empty. And then I noticed a figure standing at the edge of my yard, just beyond the reach of the streetlight. It didn't move, didn't shift, just stood there, tall and thin, completely still. I told myself it was nothing, that it was a trick of the light or my imagination, but I couldn't shake the feeling that it was watching me. I locked the doors, pulled the blinds, and tried to convince myself that was enough. I even called a friend, but my voice felt hollow as I explained what I was seeing, and they laughed it off. Probably just a neighbor or a passerby, they said. You're imagining it. I wanted to believe that, but when I went to bed, I could still see the shadow through the thin curtain barely outlined by the street lamp, and it hadn't moved. The next night, it was closer, at the edge of my driveway now. I try not to look, try to watch a movie, but I kept catching glimpses. The more I looked, the more impossible it seemed. Its face, I couldn't see one. No eyes, no mouth. Just a blank, smooth surface, pale in the dim light. I stayed inside, every door locked, clutching a baseball but I hadn't touched since college. Hours passed. Every creak of the house felt like a footstep, every whisper of wind like a voice. By morning, I was shaking uncontrollably. I tried to leave the next day. I opened the front door, hoping a morning glance would reveal nothing. But the figure was there, closer than before, staring with that blank, impossible face. My stomach twisted. I slammed the door and didn't try again. Days turned into nights. Each night, it returned, always patient, always silent. It never moved closer physically, but I could feel its attention like a pressure in my chest. I barely ate. I barely slept. I started seeing it in reflections, in windows of other houses on the street, standing there silently, as if it had been everywhere all along. Then something new appeared. Scratches. Thin, shallow lines on the front door, running horizontally. They hadn't been there before. My hands trembled as I ran my fingers over them. The house felt alive. The figure wasn't just outside. It was connected somehow to every creak of the floor, every shadow cast in the corner of my vision. One night, at the stroke of midnight, I saw it move. Not toward me, not really, but it raised an arm and pointed at something on the porch. I froze. A small notebook lay there, leather-bound, worn, old. I hadn't seen it before. I knew I shouldn't, but I reached for it. The moment my fingers touched the cover, the world shifted. Memories not my own flooded me. Streets I had never walked, houses I had never seen, people I had never met. And I realized with a cold certainty that the figure outside was not just watching me. It was recording me, learning me, preparing me. I dropped the notebook. The figure faded into the shadows, but I could feel it in my chest, in my mind. I was no longer just an observer. I had become part of it. Something had changed inside me. I didn't know what, but the world had tilted. The quiet street, the trees, the night, they all felt wrong, like the very air was waiting for me to notice something I couldn't quite name. I tried to escape the next day. My car wouldn't start. My phone was dead. Every road I knew led back to the house. I realized then that this wasn't a prank. This wasn't random. This was deliberate. Weeks passed. Shadows appeared in the corners of my vision. Figures standing in yards, at the edges of driveways and windows. Blank faces, patient, observing. And I understood something horrifying. I had joined them. I was learning what they had learned, seeing what they had seen. And then the strangest part happened. One evening, I stepped outside deliberately. Not to flee, not to confront, but to watch. And I saw a neighbor, alone in their yard, glance at me and freeze. Their eyes widened. I knew, somehow, that they had noticed me the way I had noticed the figure. I felt the cold certainty of inevitability. The figure hadn't just been outside to scare me. It had been outside to prepare me. And now I was ready. I was patient. I was learning. I stepped back onto my porch and watched. And I understood that this was how it always worked. Someone notices. Someone invites it in, even unknowingly. And then the waiting, the observing begins again. I'm no longer afraid. I have become the watcher. I step outside at night, I wait, and I observe. The street is quiet, the house is asleep, but I see everything. And when someone new notices me, standing there at the edge of the yard, featureless, patient, watching, they will know. The horror is not outside. The horror is in the waiting. And now I wait. I had been living alone for about a month in my small house at the edge of town. A quiet street, only a few neighbors, the kind of place where nothing ever really happened. That night, though, everything changed. It started as a sound, faint and indistinct, like footsteps across gravel. I thought it was my imagination. My dog, Buster, had passed away last year, so it couldn't be him. I listened closer and realized the sound wasn't coming from inside the house. It was outside on the driveway. I approached the window cautiously. Nothing. Empty driveway, quiet street, the soft glow of the streetlight bouncing off the asphalt. I turned away, shaking my head. Maybe it was a neighbor coming home late. I told myself to relax. Then I saw it. A figure, standing perfectly still at the edge of the yard. Tall, thin, and entirely dark, except for the faint light glinting off what looked like smooth, pale skin. My heart stuttered. I opened the window to call out, but my voice stuck in my throat. The figure didn't move. It didn't blink. It didn't breathe, at least not visibly. It just stared. I locked every door and window, turned on every light I could find, and tried to distract myself with a movie. But every shadow in the living room seemed to stretch toward the figure outside. Every creak of the floor sounded like it was coming closer. By the time I forced myself to sleep, I wasn't sure I'd close my eyes at all. The next night, it was closer, right at the edge of the porch. I checked everything. Locks were secure, doors bolted, yet I felt it was inside the house, too, somehow. I kept seeing faint scratches on the windows, tiny lines I hadn't noticed before. I tried to call someone, anyone, but my phone lost service the moment I stepped onto the porch to check. By the third night, it didn't just stand there. It moved, slowly, deliberately, from the porch to the edge of the street, never turning, never blinking, always pointing toward me. I stayed in my room, lights on, the door locked, a knife in my hand, sweating despite the cool night air. I tried to leave the house once. The moment I stepped outside, I realized the car wouldn't start. I could feel something pressing against me, a presence too heavy to push past. The street seemed to stretch impossibly long, curving back on itself, always returning me to the house. It didn't matter which way I went. It didn't matter how fast I ran. Then it began leaving signs. First, scratches on the doors. Thin, shallow, deliberate. Then marks on the walls inside the house, as if it had been here without entering, marking its territory, its presence. I tried to ignore it, but I couldn't. I barely ate. I barely slept. My life became a long, tense vigil, waiting for the thing outside to do something. I didn't know what. And then one night, I heard it differently. A sound that didn't come from the street. It came from my own yard, from behind me. I spun around. Nothing. Just the house, the porch, the street. Then I saw movement at the corner of my eye. A shadow detached itself from the darkness. Not a person, not exactly. Featureless. Pale. Smooth where there should have been a face. I froze. I couldn't breathe. Then it raised its arms slowly, holding something. A small, leather-bound notebook, worn and weathered, appeared in its hand. I wanted to run. I wanted to throw it away. But some instinct, curiosity, fear, or compulsion I didn't understand made me reach for it. The instant my fingers touched the leather, the world shifted. Memories flooded me. Not mine. Houses I had never seen. Streets I had never walked. People I had never met. Fear, panic, helplessness. I felt it all as if it belonged to me. I realized the notebook was a record of the watched, the observed, and now I was in it. I dropped it. The figure outside didn't move. It simply stood there, patient, observing. And then, impossibly, it dissolved into the night, melting into the shadows as though it had never been a separate thing at all. But I had changed. I could feel it in me. The patience, the watching, the cold awareness that never let up. Days passed. I tried to leave. Roads looped back. Cars wouldn't start. Phones died. The figure had taught me what it wanted me to learn. Escape was impossible. Understanding was compulsory. I began seeing it everywhere. Shadows at windows, in corners, glimpses in passing cars. Others like it. Blank faces. Patient. Observing. And I knew then the truth. It wasn't outside to scare me. It was outside to prepare me. And I had been prepared. One night, I stepped outside deliberately. Not to flee, not to fight, but to wait. And I understood something else. When someone notices, really notices, it waits for them. When someone invites it, even unknowingly, it begins the cycle anew. I'm no longer afraid. I have become the watcher. I stand at the edge of my yard, featureless, patient, waiting. And one day, someone new will notice me. They will feel the weight of observation, the inevitability of attention. And then they will understand. The horror isn't outside. The horror is in noticing. And now I wait. I moved into my first real house 2 weeks ago. Small, old, single story on a quiet suburban street. I wanted peace, a place to breathe after years in cramped apartments. The street was almost too quiet. Even at night, I could hear the wind stirring the maple leaves, the occasional distant car, and nothing else. The first night, I was unpacking boxes when I noticed movement outside the living room window. At first, I thought it was my imagination, but then I saw it clearly, a figure standing at the edge of the street. Tall, thin, completely still. I blinked and it didn't move. Not a step, not a twitch, not a blink. Just there, watching. I tried to convince myself it was a neighbor or someone lost. I closed the blinds, locked the doors, and tried to focus on unpacking. But every time I glanced at the window, the figure was closer, or maybe I had just imagined the distance shrinking. By the third night, it had moved to the edge of my driveway. I stayed inside, lights on, every door locked, clutching a baseball bat I had found in the garage. My dog had died a year ago, so I had no one to keep watch but myself. I thought about calling someone, anyone, but every time I picked up the phone, it wouldn't work. No signal. I went outside to check the street once, thinking maybe it would vanish in daylight, but the street was empty, the figure gone, or maybe it had never been there, really. Then the scratching started. Thin, deliberate lines along the front door. I had never noticed them before. They weren't deep, but I could feel the pattern as I traced them with my fingers. Someone, or something, was trying to make contact. But why me? I tried to sleep, but each floorboard creak, each shadow moving across the room, made my heart race. I began seeing it in the reflections of windows, in the darkness of other rooms, even when I thought I wasn't looking. Featureless, pale, patient, always waiting. One night, I saw it move differently. It raised an arm, and in its hand was a small object, a leather-bound notebook, worn with pages that seemed almost alive. It had appeared on the porch. I didn't know how. I wanted to throw it away, burn it, run into the night, but something made me reach for it. The moment I touched the leather, my mind opened to places I had never been. Houses I had never seen, streets I had never walked, lives I had never lived. Fear, confusion, despair. I realized it had been recording me, studying me, waiting for the right moment. And now I was part of it. I dropped the notebook. The figure dissolved into the shadows, but I could feel it inside me. Patient, observing, learning, waiting. I tried to leave the house the next day. The car wouldn't start. The roads twisted back to the street. The phone died again. I understood. Escape was impossible. The figure wasn't just outside. It was part of the world now. Weeks passed. Shadows in corners, silhouettes in windows, glimpses in passing cars. Always watching, always patient. And I realized the truth. It hadn't been outside to frighten me. It had been preparing me. One night, I stepped onto the porch deliberately. I didn't run. I didn't shout. I stood still, waiting. Across the street, I saw someone else notice me, a neighbor who had never paid attention before. Their eyes widened. Fear, recognition, understanding. The figure had chosen them next. And I understood completely. This wasn't about surviving. This wasn't about escaping. This was a cycle. Someone notices. Someone invites it in. And then the waiting, the observing begins again. I'm no longer afraid. I have become part of it. I stand at the edge of the yard, featureless, patient, waiting. And someday, someone new will look out their window and see me. And when they do, they will understand. The horror is not outside. The horror is in the noticing. And now I wait.
Thanks for listening, my friends. More true horror is coming. Just like, comment, and subscribe.